Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dana Voglitis. I am the Assistant Director of the Office of Technology Development here at FAU. And we have a great webinar in store for you today. But first, for those of you that are not familiar with my office, I just wanted to take a few moments to explain who we are and what we do. So the Office of Technology Development has two primary goals here at FAU. The first is the legal protection of intellectual property that's developed through university research, and that can be accomplished through patents, copyrights, or trademarks typically. The second goal is the commercialization of that research through license agreements, sponsored research, arrangements like that with industry, and that can be with a large established company, a small startup company, or even a company you start yourself. So this is just a list of some of the resources that we offer, both for our innovators here at FAU. You can be a faculty member, a student, or a staff member. And all of our services for those internal to FAU are completely free of charge. So I encourage you to contact us. Our information's at the bottom of the page. You can call us, email us, find us on the FAU website, or connect with us on social media. So now to our webinar. It's titled Bringing FAU Innovations to Market, Commercializing University Research. So we're going to be talking to you about issues like, how do you work with a company as a researcher? What's the difference between industry-sponsored research and federally funded research, which you may be more familiar with? And if you want to start your own company to commercialize some intellectual property you create here at FAU, how can you go about doing that? So these are some of the questions we hope to answer for you today. If you have any questions throughout this presentation, you are welcome to submit them in the Q&A box that should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The chat feature has been disabled for this webinar, so please don't use the chat feature, use the Q&A feature. And our speaker will answer these questions throughout the presentation as we get them. Now on to our speaker. Dr. Whitney Hough has a PhD in chemistry and MBA in strategy from the University of Alabama. She started her career as a venture development associate in the Office of Forward Technology Transfer at the University of Alabama. In this role, she focused on faculty, staff, and student startup companies, and was then promoted to assistant director. There, she was responsible for managing the student interns, triaging invention disclosures, and marketing technologies. Upon her family's relocation to Cincinnati, she joined TreMonti Consulting, an innovation and intellectual property consultancy, as director. Here, she assists a variety of clients in the commercialization of their intellectual property through technology assessments, active marketing, and license negotiation assistance. So welcome, Whitney.
Thanks, Dana. Happy to be here. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with a scenario. So you might have a technology that you're working on or something that you think might be commercializable, but maybe you don't have it firmed up. If you don't, we can think about a scenario to go through this process of commercialization. So let's say that you discovered some compound ABC. You know it has some adhesive properties. In addition, it's both edible and not toxic. Okay, so it can be used in a variety of different things. You have prototyped this technology, meaning you have made the compounds, optimize them. You've tested them against competitors. They perform exceedingly well. You then talk to the Office of Technology Development. So you talk to Dana, and you guys come up with a strategy to protect the technology. So from here, once you protected the technology, you might go ahead and do a research presentation. You might publish. And what's the next step after that? So kind of in traditional academic research, you would move on to that next idea or thought. But what if you decided that you wanted to commercialize it? Okay, there's kind of really two main paths that we'll talk about. And that first one is licensing your technology. In this case, the general process is that a company expresses interest. So either FAU reaches out to a company and says, hey, we have this really cool adhesive. You're an adhesive company. We think this would be great in your portfolio. Or the company reaches out to FAU. Maybe they have read your publication, they have saw your research presentation, and they think, hey, this would be a really cool technology for our company. You then typically have a technical discussion. You, as the inventor and the technical expert, talk to their technical people. They're going to ask you a lot of different questions, things that you might not know the answer to, and that's fine, right? As an academic researcher, you don't really understand or know like pricing or manufacturing processes, and that's fine. So they will often test the product. You will do what's called a material transfer agreement, give them some samples for them to test in their equipment, in their processes, in their laboratories. The company then will work with the Office for Technology Development, and you'll negotiate what's called a royalty structure. So how much money should they pay for the commercialization of this product? And the product depends. If it's a medical device versus a pharmaceutical versus a chemical, they're all different product development timeframes. Medical devices, take 5 to 10 years to come to market. Pharmaceuticals are 8 to 15 years. So that plays into the fees that you would receive. They also might pay for the patent expenses. So if FAU has already protected the technology, they may pay for the past expenses that FAU has already incurred, and they might also pay for the future. In addition, they might have sponsored research. This is often pretty common for technologies that are somewhat early stage, meaning you have done the kind of bare minimum, but it needs further testing. They may sponsor you for a year or two to further develop that technology, all while they are kind of parallel understanding the market space and how they would commercialize it. The company then would license the technology. So this is kind of a formal agreement between FAU and the company, and it lays out all of the different things that you guys are responsible for. So what the company's paying for, what the company has to provide to FAU in terms of reporting and information, and then what FAU is bringing to the table. So these documents are typically 20 plus pages and very legal heavy. Additionally, there's often yearly reporting. So the company will provide you with information on, okay, how much have they put into the commercialization? Have they done any further research on their own? Have they sold this product? If so, what percentage does FAU get back? And then that percentage is divvied up among the inventors. There's also a progress report. So if it's not yet commercialized, meaning it's still in development, they'll talk about what experiments have been done, if they're seeking FDA approval, things along those lines. Okay, so what are kind of the positives and negatives of licensing a technology? So on the positive side, you're really moving that technology to the marketplace, right? And a company really is going to help FAU do that. FAU doesn't have the resources to become a commercial entity, and you don't really want to be a manufacturing facility, right? Your goal is to discover new cool things. You hopefully get a return on investment with some financial gain. So for an established company, right, they typically have the means to pay some amount of money, right, which means that you as an inventor could get actual personal income from that. It allows you as the inventor to focus on other things, right? You're kind of passing that baton off to the company, allowing them to take the lead in doing the commercialization while you focus on the laboratory. You focus on that next cool iteration or a totally new project. Additionally, it can actually do public good, right? So I'm working with a university who is developing a rare disease molecule. The disease only impacts 1,500 people. And they're working with a company to move that out of the laboratory. Even though that's a small population pool, it is doing good because right now there's no current treatment for that disease. On the flip side, there are some negatives to licensing your technology. First is there's a loss of control, okay? This is your baby. You have worked night and day on this technology, on this research, on whatever it is. You put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it, and now you're passing it along. And the company can do kind of as they please with the technology. So there is a bit of a loss of control. Additionally, just because you've transferred to a company doesn't mean that commercialization may actually occur. There are all kinds of market dynamic things, manufacturing issues that could crop up that has really nothing to do with the technical expertise or the technical ability of your technology. It's just the dynamics don't work for commercialization. Additionally, there might not be any financial compensation. So if the company doesn't commercialize the technology, you might actually not get any money, right? And so you've done a lot of time, effort, and work. You've done this negotiation, you've talked to this company, and then at the end, you don't really get anything. All right, so a couple example deals. So one at the University of Alabama. We did one between University of Alabama and BASF. So if you don't know, BASF is the largest chemical company in the world. And this actually won a 2006 deal of distinction between an academic and a private sector company. So this was exclusive patenting or exclusive licensing of patents specifically focusing on ionic liquids that dissolve and regenerate and process cellulose. So cellulose is a molecule that is in trees. It's very difficult to dissolve because of the hydrogen bonding, and we came up with a new way to do that. So before the licensing really became active, there was sponsored research. So BASF sponsored 2 years at about $500,000 for additional research. However, even though they did this deal in 2006, it's now been 14 years later. This technology has actually never been commercialized. And that's because ionic liquids to produce are actually very expensive. So because cellulose is relatively inexpensive, they're having a hard time with the market dynamics to use a very expensive chemical to break it down. They do continue to hold that license and they pay a minimum fee every year. However, you can't really go and buy the product on the market. In another example, we had a Midwestern university and a small company, not necessarily a startup, but a smaller company, so under 50 employees. They had an exclusive licensing of both a patent and know-how. So do recognize that part of your technology kind of package would be the know-how. That is the tips and tricks on how to really optimize the technology to get the best yields, to make whatever properties, things that aren't really written down in a patent. In this case, it was an algorithm to analyze social media posts. So it's a way to take things like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and analyze all of the different posts and tags to come up with different trends. In this case, a faculty member was brought on as a board of directors. So that was a separate role from his role at the institution. And he was able to assist with the technical aspects of implementing this technology. They are then commercializing the service through large consumer companies. And what they decided to do is they actually purchased the IP. So they gave the institution a large lump sum and purchased the IP instead of doing royalties, so annually or biannually payments. And that's due to the changing landscape in social media. So they preferred to just have the IP up front because there's not a lot of commercialization that has to occur in this stage. So they wanted to kind of get to the market quicker, as fast as possible, just due to the fact that they know Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook might be very different in 5 years, and they wanted to capitalize while they could. Okay, so what should you do first? You have the technology, you think, okay, I want to license it. I want to go down that route. What do? Your first thing is to talk to the Office of Technology Development. Okay, so in this case, for like a chemical, there could be multiple market entry points. So we could go to multiple different markets. They can tell you, okay, which one should we go to? And if you don't have an invention disclosure, you haven't disclosed the technology, that's kind of your first step. They also perform what's called active marketing. So they will prepare marketing materials, typically a one-page summary of what are the high features of the technology, why would somebody use it? And you actually email and call people. So TreMonti Consulting does this on behalf of FAU. We call email companies and say, hey, look at this cool technology. Here's how you could use it. The company then might say, yeah, we're interested in it. We would pass that information along to Dana. Dana also does passive marketing through the website. So she puts information on FAU's website that's searchable, provides that high level overview. It's kind of a small paragraph, and companies can then contact FAU about those technologies. Additionally, Dana provides expertise during negotiation. So kind of managing both the inventor and FAU's expectations and needs, right? So understanding, okay, from the technology point of view, do we need to do sponsor research? If not, what kind of compensation should we be getting in this license agreement? Okay, so let's say licensing doesn't seem like an option for you. You have really been bitten by that bug. You want to be the entrepreneur. You want to take that technology and go to the marketplace. Okay, so faculty entrepreneurship is a kind of growing trend. Since 1995, US universities have formed a large portion of startup companies, okay, over 10,000. Primarily, they've been really central in the computer industry and biotechnology. So if you think that you want to be an entrepreneur, you are not in the minority anymore, right? It's become kind of in vogue. However, before you decide you want to be an entrepreneur, I would ask yourself a couple of questions. Okay, do you have the time? Okay, time, we all know, is very precious. And being an entrepreneur means that you kind of do everything. You slice, you dice, you clean the toilets, you answer the emails, you do everything. So do you have time, given your current responsibilities as a faculty member, as, a husband, a wife, a parent, to do these things? Okay. Additionally, are you willing to jump through some hoops on conflict of interest? Do you want to fill out paperwork? Do you have a network to round out your team? As someone who has actually been an academic entrepreneur, you have to remember that the technical portion only gets you so far. It can be really very sound technically, but it might not make sense from a business point of view. So do you have people that you can rely on to help you with that extra side? And do you have the patience to work on this business for several years, maybe a decade or two? So you have to recognize that success doesn't happen instantaneously. Especially since the technology might be in a very early stage, we might need multiple years of development to get it to an actual commercial product. All right, so if you answered yes to those, the next thing that you need to do is fill out paperwork. One big thing is conflict of interest. So when are you wearing your faculty hat, your staff hat, and when are you wearing your entrepreneur hat, right? So you have to think of yourself as kind of two different people, and you have to manage that potential conflict of interest. Additionally, you're going to have to do a financial disclosure, especially if you're going to be generating income from that business separate from how you would as a faculty or staff member. So this typically doesn't mean things like sponsored research. That's a traditional kind of academic venture, but other things where people are maybe providing, or you're providing materials to somebody, you are commercializing a product outside of the institution. Additionally, you need to talk to your department head and or dean how you are working on your project. Your startup will be very different from your research, right? They need to be kind of two separate things. And then you're going to have agreement with the Office of Technology Development. Okay, what are you going to do with the technology? What's your development plan? How do you plan to kind of move those goalposts closer to the marketplace? There are resources though. So this isn't a send you out into the ocean with the sharks to battle for entrepreneur resources. There is actually quite a few in the technical space. So the first is the Small Business Technology Transfer Grant. Many people probably have heard of SBIR, which we'll talk about in a second. This is kind of the younger sibling of that program. It is only offered by 5 agencies, so Department of Defense, NIH, NSF, Department of Energy, and NASA. And the goal here is to focus on R&D between small businesses and research institutions. So that's where the technology transfer comes to place. This is a technology that we think have some inklings for commercial application, but it's not quite to that level. So the research institution plays a role where the small business is really looking at that market potential. So there are 3 phases. So phase 1 is really focused on, okay, what's that technical merit, what's the feasibility, and the commercial potential. So phase 1 is about $150,000. Of that, a portion, so 30%, can go to the research and development. Specifically, that has to be a nonprofit institution. Okay, so for you as a faculty member, that means that you could focus on the R&D aspect, or you could be on the small business side and focus on the commercial potential. However, you can't do both. So for STTR, you cannot be the PI for the research and the PI for the business, right? That's too much of a conflict of interest. So you have to make sure, again, that you have that team to be able to have that business expertise along with the technical. As with SBIR, you have to have a successful phase 1 to apply for phase 2. So the hit rate for the phase 1 is about 15 to 20%. Phase 2 is about 50%. And the phase 2 is kind of where the big bucks come into play. It's typically about $1 million to really focus on that commercialization efforts. They do have what's called a phase 3, which is technically the commercialization of the technology, but it's not funded. So it's there, but it's really focused on moving that technology from kind of the laboratory into the marketplace. So you can complete phase 1 and 2 of STTRs, and then you can actually go and compete for SBIR funding. SBIR funding is much larger. So there are 12 different agencies involved in here. Here, they're really focused on that small business. So there's no requirement to have a research institution partner with you on this. They do have the same 3 phases. You have that phase 1, $150,000, phase 2, about $1 million. It is way more competitive than STTR though. So your SBIR hit rates is in the 10% rate. The phase 2 is still about 50%. Okay. However, even if you get, let's say, $1 million SBIR phase 2, it still takes time to make a successful business. So through Poor Technologies is technology that I helped in my career as technology transfer assistant director at the University of Alabama. So Francesca, who is the CEO, and I did our PhDs in chemistry at the same time. She developed this kind of cool catalyst as a graduate student. So her and her faculty member formed a company in 2013. Thus far, in the past 8-ish years, they've raised about $1.6 million in federal funding, in addition with venture capital funding. However, they still have yet to be full production. So they haven't really produced the product yet for mass consumption. They are a virtual company. So that means they don't have a physical location. And that is the goal of what do they call minimizing burn rate. So minimizing the cost of having an office, secretary, things along those lines. So in 8 years, they made quite a bit of progress. However, they still actually haven't commercialized the technology. Another technology, Scylla Nanotechnology, spun out from Georgia Tech in 2011, so about 10 years ago. And they just recently, I think last month, received $590 million for their battery technology. Okay, so this is actually going to help them build a physical plant to manufacture these batteries for both smartphones and automotives. And I really love this quote from the article from the CEO. It says, "It took 8 years and 35,000 iterations to create new battery chemistry, and that was just step 1." Okay, so you have to think about, as an entrepreneur, you're in for the long game, right? You have to understand there is going to be trials and tribulations, multiple years and iterations to get to that final goal. In addition to those governmental researchers I've talked about, there's also FAU resources. One great resource is the NSF I-Corps program. It's 4 to 5 weeks, 2 to 4 person team, and it's really focused on what's called customer discovery. Here, you're actually going to talk to your customers and figure out, do they have a problem that your product meets, right? Is there a way that your product needs to be formulated or features it needs to have, right? So when you go to talk to your customers, they'll tell you, is this problem number 1 or is this problem number 50 on my list of 100? When you complete the NSF I-Corps program, you are then eligible for a $50,000 grant opportunity. It does allow you to travel to meet customers, go to trade shows, kind of understand the market dynamics. There's contact here if you want to reach out to them for their next cohort. There's also other business resources for the tech runway. So this is a way to accelerate that startup. So you've committed to do the startup. You want to be the entrepreneur. Here you can get mentoring for people in a variety of different areas. Also potential funding sources in the South Florida area. And there's a no-cost workspace. So that's, again, very important for your conflict of interest, is to have kind of a separate workspace to go out and put on that entrepreneur hat away from FAU campus. Additionally, there's a Florida SBDC. So again, they have knowledge, resources, expertise. They provide no-cost consulting and research resources specifically for small business development. So you can see both of the emails here if you want to reach out. Okay, so these are the 2 main ways to commercialize the technology that you already have. But people probably on this webinar don't maybe have a technology, maybe have an idea or something in development, and that's fine. So you can also commercialize that research in a different way. You can partner with industry. Okay, so this is something very different from federal funding. You have to kind of understand the mindset of industry. What motivates them to partner with academic institutions? One is it's located near talent. Okay, talent meaning students, postdocs, grad students, right? People that they're going to want to recruit for their company to make that next generation product to bring their company into the next year. They also like to seed early stage research. A lot of companies are coming very hyper focused on their research internally. And if they find something interesting, but it's adjunct to their own research capabilities, they will farm that out to the academic institution, right? You have the expertise, the equipment. They don't want to recreate that internally. Additionally, there might be a problem they can't solve. They can't figure it out. You have the expertise, you have the equipment. And they also like to cultivate institutions, right? So you can think of FAU as not only a research enterprise, but you have business, you have software, you have IT, you have all of the different areas that the industry could really leverage to make their business better. Okay, so what is the advantages for academia? Okay, so funding is obviously kind of a number one advantage. There's new revenue streams, right? New abilities to capture funding. There's also recruitment, right? So if a graduate student works with a company on a project, the likelihood of that graduate student being able to get a job offer from that company increases exponentially. There's also experience to collaborate with others, right? So an academic institution, you're kind of singular, maybe in your expertise, but wouldn't it be great to collaborate with people that are also really interested in your area of research and they want to figure out how to solve a problem or commercialize a technology? You might have the ability to use kind of the latest and greatest pieces of equipment or state-of-the-art facilities. There's also real life impact, right? If you help some company solve a problem, that might be used in the future to deliver some life-saving drug, to help a medical device come to the market. And you also get to look under the hood, right? So a lot of times you might think X is the problem in the industry and really it's Z. So you get a better understanding of what's really driving innovation at different corporations. So as we talked about asking questions for yourself as an entrepreneur, ask these questions of yourself when you're thinking about doing industry-sponsored research. Are you willing to work on a project that really isn't intellectually stimulating or scholarly? Do you recognize that a lot of companies will ask you to run samples, right, and analyze data? That's not really the most interesting work, right? However, they're really kind of testing out your capabilities before they're going to sign on the dotted line and provide you with multi-million-dollar sponsored research. They're going to want to make sure that you can really bring that level of expertise they need. Are you able and willing to operate within a tight scope of work? So most federally funded grants do have a no-cost extension ability. They're often multi-years. That's the opposite for industry-sponsored research. It's often very tight timelines, so 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. They want to understand the problem, can it be solved? If not, they want to move on to something else. Additionally, are you willing to potentially not publish results of the research? So a lot of times you might be working on something that's highly confidential. It might not have gone to the market yet. They might be currently developing it, and they're not going to allow you to publish results on that. Are you okay with that? Are your students okay with that? And then lastly, are you willing and able to keep information confidential? So companies will have a confidentiality clause in their sponsored research agreements. That is a given because again, you're working with their intellectual property, their trade secrets, and you might be seeing things that again, might not be on the market for another 5 or 10 years, right? And so that information has to be kept confidential. That's kind of the opposite of the academic world where we are sharing information, we are collaborating. Additionally, there are different ways of thinking and working with industry. Okay, it has to be very focused. So the scope of the work and the ideas are very focused on a singular problem or a single area they want researched. You also have to be flexible. So oftentimes with federal funding, you are proposing the experiments. You are proposing what you want to accomplish in a year or 2 years. Here, you might start on a project and 3 months in, they want to pivot because The price of rare earth elements went off the chart because of trade wars, right? You've got to be able to pivot and change with the company's needs. You also have to recognize the goals of each party, right? So in that agreement, what are the goals that you need from an academic perspective? And what are the goals that they need from an industry perspective? And then how do you collaborate as an institution, right? So again, think about, are there other resources at FAU or with the collaborators you've worked with before that you can leverage to help, again, that company solve that problem they've come to you? So ultimately, I think of sponsor research with industry as bridging that gap. What's the goal between you as an academic person and the industry? How do we consider wants and needs of each side? And can we come to agreement? Because in this case, it's more of a relationship. And you don't want to be in a bad relationship with an industry member because nobody's going to be happy. All right, so you've decided you're ready to take the plunge. You want to kind of put yourself out there and work with industry. What do? Okay, so you have to kind of do your homework. What will you offer? Okay, and I would actually recommend that you write it down. What do you have to offer? What expertise? Do you have mouse models, cell models, cool piece of equipment? What do you have that industry might be interested in? Okay, now we have to bring awareness. Okay, do we prepare some marketing materials? Do you talk about these things at conferences, in your papers? How do you get people to be interested? Another thing you can do is we can target specific companies, industries. Look at leveraging your network. Is there anybody that you know that maybe reached out to you a couple years ago when you were at a conference and said, oh, I think this is a really cool idea or technology, and now you're ready to reach back out to them and say, hey, I've done all of these steps. I have performed this research. Would you be interested in partnering or collaborating? And then figure out what are some other available resources. So Dana's office has resources that we can leverage in terms of active marketing. Again, it doesn't cost you anything for us to go out and talk to industry and see if they have a problem in this space. Do they need expertise? And the biggest thing in industry sponsor research is maximizing that relationship. Okay, so having what we call like a one-off relationship where somebody pays you money to run some samples is one thing, but to have more of a strategic relationship where you become an extension of their team is a very different type of relationship, right? And here, customer service is a priority, right? So you want them to think of you as an indispensable part of the team. So you have to have regular communication. A lot of time with federal grants, you're doing a closeout report after a year, 2 years, however many. Here, they're going to want to understand, okay, what's going on this month, this week, every other week. And you also have to really listen. A lot of times with federal grants, you're telling them, here's what I did, here's the results. In this case, you need to listen to what are their issues, what are their problems, what are they getting caught up on? And ask those clarifying questions so you, when you perform that research, you can guide them and say, okay, I know we proposed to do X, but based on what you guys are saying, I think we should do Y. You really want to be very illustrative of that value that you bring in the collaboration with their technical team. Additionally, since companies actually have a lot of problems that you might not be aware of, they're what's called industry technology challenges. So these are kind of clearinghouses of opportunities, and companies, pretty big name companies that you'd be familiar with, put areas of interest on these sites. So they will either have specific problems or expertise they're looking for. They will have a specific criteria of what they want and what they don't want. And then you pretty much provide a 1 to 2 page non-confidential summary. So you can see here, this is one I picked. BIC is looking for new inks or materials for pencils. Okay, so they are looking for technical things and expertise. You also have yet to come. This is very similar to 9 Sigma, but it also includes federal agency stuff. So you see here we have NIST looking for something. We have Sundry looking for something. They're also interested in data sets and non-STEM technologies. So for the NIST, you see they're looking for some automated data identification. Another one is looking for energy management solutions for ready-to-drink beverages, all kinds of different things. So it's worthwhile to add these sites to your weekly, monthly list that you look at for opportunities, because there might be something that shows up that is a perfect fit for you. So overall, there's really no one way to commercialize research. One technology might go the licensing path, the other one might be sponsored research, or maybe you decided you want to be an entrepreneur. All of these ways are very viable paths to commercialize research. So that's all I have. So I want to thank you for taking the time, and I'm prepared to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Whitney. Again, I'll just remind the audience, if you have any questions, you're welcome to submit them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And while we wait for those, Whitney, a question I get often is, what are some of the services that TreMonti provides? Most of your clients are universities, right? So what are the services you provide, and does TreMonti ever work with small startup companies? Say a faculty member wants to start a company and they're interested in what TreMonti does. Could they work with you directly?
Yeah, so we do work with some startup companies, specifically those that have been funded via STTR, SBIR. In both of those grant opportunities, there is a carve out for consulting, specifically kind of in market development. So we have done primarily for startup companies, things like customer discovery, where you provide us with kind of a series of questions and we go out and interview potential customers, right? To get a better idea of what the marketplace looks like. We ask a lot of questions about pricing. So what would you pay for X thing, right? How much would you buy? So a lot more what I call like kind of logistical financial questions type thing. We also do active marketing. So especially for companies that have kind of what I call a wide technology range, meaning it can be used in a variety of markets, we will go out and market the technology into specific sectors to get the interest level. So we do that. As Dana has already talked about, we provide services for free through FAU. So if you're interested in licensing, we can provide active marketing and things along those lines.
Great. We have a couple of questions in the queue. First one, for an STTR proposal, what percentage of the work has to be done by the university and what percentage has to be done by the company? And then they also asked, can a startup company use leased laboratory space at a university?
So the STT proposal, I want to say the percentage maximum that can be done by the university is 30%. Okay, the rest has to be done by the business. So there is a cap. However, 30% is more than SBIR. I think SBIR, the subcontract is like 20%. Typically, leasing laboratory space depends on each institution. So I have institutions that have what's called like private space that's not been bonded by public bonds that allows them to lease that. I've also had a situation where we got an exception from the board of trustees because the startup needed to use a piece of equipment. That piece of equipment did not exist in like a 500-mile radius. They did have a phase 2 SBIR, so I think they got $1.2 million. So we did make an exception and lease that space, but that will be specific to each institution.
Great. Okay, next question. I already own a small company, and one thing I'm curious of as a PhD student graduating this year is what I am allowed to do with the research knowledge I have acquired throughout my education, as it has been funded by NIH.
So the knowledge and expertise that you have acquired, you can use, right? It will depend if you've developed a specific technology. So if you've talked to Dana's office and you've gotten a patent on a technology, do recognize that anything funded by a federal agency such as NIH is subject to what's called the Bayh-Dole Act of the 1980s. And that just means that you can commercialize it, the institution can, but also the government gets a non-exclusive license to use that for governmental purposes. So that hasn't really been an issue thus far because the government really wants to only use it internally.
All right, and the last question. If a company never commercializes a technology, can you develop it further and change to a different company or change the agreement with the company?
So typically there is what's called a clawback clause within a license agreement that says if you don't progress the technology, right, if you run into a series of roadblocks, that the institution can claw back the intellectual property and then kind of redevelop, reconfigure it. It will depend on if the company is what I call like paying the piper. So if the institution's not getting any money and it's not being commercialized, it's really not advantageous, right? Let's go ahead and take it back and retool it. If the company is paying for it, like in the case of BSF, institution might have a hard time arguing, okay, let's pull it back and reconfigure it because we are getting some compensation for it, even though it's not being commercialized. So it will depend a little bit on the situation and what the company is actually doing with the technology.
All right, and one more question popped up. Should I first get a patent through FAU before considering to establish a startup company?
So I think intellectual property protection is very important for a startup company. That is your kind of competitive advantage. So I would recommend getting any intellectual property protection. It might be a patent, it could be a trademark, copyright, trade secrets, before establishing that startup company, just so you do have those assets at the beginning. Additionally, that would then allow you, once you license that from the institution, to seek STTR, SBIR funding. You will have to have an agreement in place with the institution or whichever kind of organization you're getting the IP from to get that funding.
All right, well, that's all the questions we have. So I'll just say thank you again to Whitney for this great presentation, and thank you all for attending. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me directly. The office email address is techdevelop@fau.edu. Have a good day, everyone.